Hello again. In this video, I want to continue talking about ecclesiology from the perspective of African anthropology or African theological anthropology. And here, I will be looking at the church as a kingdom, not a kingdom, but a kingdom, which is, of course, the coming together of relatives of Christ. This is not original to me. This is a phrase borrowed from the work of a Ghanaian scholar, actually a Nigerian scholar married to a Ghanaian. She's called Professor Mercy Amba Oduoye. She's a fantastic scholar. She is the founder of what is called the Circle of Concerned African Women Theologians that was founded in 1989 in order to advocate and promote the space of African women theologians. They have done a lot of work to advance the cause of African women scholars on the African continent. They convene consultations annually, and they have several publications, quite a very vibrant community that has really truly provided what in 1989, when it was founded, the missing wing, because they were saying that African theology cannot fly with one wing. It has to have both wings. And so they have the wing of the men, African men, but you also have the women contribution so that it can take off and fly together. So this is what Professor Oduoye said in an article titled "The African Family as a Symbol of Ecumenism." And she looks at the Ghanaian people. There's a particular ethnic community in Ghana by the name Akan. And she says that Africans see the church as an abusua, association of households of Christ, the coming together of relatives of Christ to be a new community that does the will of God. So what she is trying to do is to borrow from the African place of family, because in Africa and many majority world cultures, that is Latin America, you have the Asia and Africa, family tends to be very, very critical for how we operate. And for family, of course, our definition of many of these communities, family is not the nuclear family, not father, mother, and children. You have the wider community. You have your aunties, you have your uncles, you have those who are not associated by blood, but they are within your familial space. And so that is often considered a family. And so she borrows this idea to say this can really yield a lot of contribution and assist in the advancement of ecumenism. Because if we look at family, look at the church as family, then it can be able to advance that. And then she says each denomination in this perspective, the denomination of the Christ family, is a unit expected by Christ the source to be a visible manifestation of all that is Christ-like. So that when individual members of various denominations meet in a strange land, they may recognize the symbol of the presence of Christ, gather around it and celebrate their oneness, being born by one baptism and constituted into a people by one cross. So what she is doing is to say, in the African people's perception of family, there is the head of the family, and then you have the children, you have the wife, you have the other relatives who are rallied around that family, and they listen to the head. And here, borrowing that idea to say that in this kind of conceptualization, Jesus Christ is the head of the church, and the church listens to the voice of the church, and the church is being formed as it obeys that voice into Christ likeness. So that the other isms that often divide the church, tribalism and other self-interests, sectarian interests, begin to disintegrate because the church is paying attention to the voice of the head. And I was reading this article, and I was so fascinated by how she expands the outlook of family to say, for example, in the African setup, family is, as I have mentioned, not just the immediate family, it's bigger than that, it's wider. And it says that in the African family, it's ever expanding. Like even for me here in my house, I have people that we are not associated by blood, but they are my family. You find that generosity forms a big component of what it means to be an African family. And I think that also informs what it means to be the church in Africa, because the spirit of generosity, the spirit of space, the spirit of expansion, expanding what it means to be a community, that outward looking community, structured in concentric cycles, in which relationships are moderated by moderated by convention, but it is more of an expansive family, not just one that is defined by this narrow perspective of just three people, father, mother, children, husband, wife, and the children. And in most cases, even in some communities, family for them, as Professor Oduweye talks about, is very, very narrow. It even boils down to the children. Say that those who don't have children then often feel really uncomfortable because they might not be included in that particular perception of family. And this is what she says: the cohesion of the African family and the quality of relationships expected has become the basis for the whole society. It has symbolized for me the meaning of being in one kingdom. Its unity is not marked by uniformity. Rather, it is founded on commitment to the founder and hence to her ideals and the well-being of the community, that names are name and honors are symbol. The family symbolizes for me a caring community within which I can find mutual commitment. So she borrows from that perception of family from Africa to say, if we looked at the church that way, then we are going to be a welcoming church, be a church that is generous and more outward looking, expansive, expanding what it means to belong and invite others in that spirit of embrace, the spirit of family. That is what I've already read. The cohesion of the African family and the quality of relationships expected has become the basis of the whole society. It has symbolized for me the meaning of being in one kingdom. Now, this, of course, the idea is not unique to Africa again. I have insisted on this. So this is the spirit that I think informs many of ecclesiologists. But I really like this contribution by these two scholars looking at exploring ecclesiology from an evangelical perspective. It says, as God's children, we are brothers and sisters of Christ and one another. Just as there is no division between God and us and Christ and us, there is to be no division between brothers and sisters as members of God's household, for we are God's family. We live in a world that is broken. We live in a world distorted by sin. We live in a world that is fragmented because of the damaging power of evil and sin. And so that has really destroyed this perception of the church as a family, the church as a unit, a church as people related. We might not be related by blood, but we are related by our divine connection to the head, divine connection to Christ by the Spirit of God. And so we need to find a way to really disrupt ethnocentrism, denominationalism, and foster a spirit of ubuntu within the church. Eliasa Fernandez, I think, is a scholar from, I don't know if it's Brazil or somewhere. I must apologize, I don't remember very well. But reimagining the human, theological anthropology in response to systemic evil, talks about the spirit of hospitality as a key component of what it means to be human. And I think this is really the spirit of family. Being able to say, hospitality is not just what we offer to others, it is also what we offer to ourselves. When we open our hearts to welcome a stranger, something deep occurs in our lives. Opening our hearts to a stranger, expanding, welcoming people, exclusion and embrace. If you've read Miroslav Volf's work, I don't know if I included it in my slides, when we open our arms to welcome others, something truly magnificent happens. And that is the beauty of family. That is the beauty of sitting together. And family members always do not have to agree. And in most cases, they do not agree. But because family, and Master Oduya talks about that, he says that within many African communities, conflict are resolved because families often have mechanisms to resolve those differences. So, back to where we started, the spirit of Ubuntu. Desmond Tutu talks about Ubuntu, that it speaks of the very essence of being human. When we want to give praise to someone, he says in the communities in South Africa, you say, oh, you know Ubuntu, hey, so-and-so has Ubuntu. Then what does that mean? You are generous, you are hospitable, you are friendly, you are caring, you are compassionate, you share what you have. So you open your arms towards somebody else. You become family for others. I remember reading Apostle Paul's in the book of Romans, chapter number 16, one of my favorite passages in scripture, where Paul sends greetings to 26 individuals, mentioning 24 of them by name. And you realize that most of those individuals are mentioned in the context of family. You have spouses there, you have relatives, you have those who are not related by blood, you have ordinary people, you have slaves, you have free men and women, you have ordinary people, you have some of them who at least we know were privileged in society, such as Erastus, who is mentioned in verse 23. And yet, it looks to me that the Roman believers were truly a united church, were truly a people that were a family to one another. And that, I think, is the spirit of Acts, chapter 2, where where the writer of Acts, Apostle Luke, says, gives a picture of the Holy Church in Acts 2:42 to 47, that it was a united church, a compassionate church, a welcoming church. I see that church as a church of Ubuntu, a church that truly lived what it means to be human in the context of the realities that were experiencing by the early church in Acts. So Desmond Tutu again says, in our African language, we say a person is a person through other persons. I would not know how to be a human at all, except I learned this from other human beings. We are made for a delicate network of relationships, of interdependence. We are meant to complement each other. All kinds of things go horribly wrong when we break that fundamental law of our being. Not even the most powerful nation can be completely self-sufficient. So I think family can offer this spirit of family, the spirit of generosity, the spirit of welcome and hospitality and compassion, can truly become a good model for us to reframe and reimagine church in the context of the fragmentations that we see in our society today. In Imaging God, Douglas Hall says that simply in our being, there we are being in relationship. Our sheer existing points beyond itself. We are creatures whose being implies relatedness. So therefore, the solitary, isolated, self-sufficient human being, the self-made man that still exists for us as a rhetorical ideal, is in fact a contradiction in terms. To be in the world is to be with. So I have said that the spirit of Ubuntu that shapes African communities is an anthropological reality. It is not an African reality. It is a reality of the entire human beings. But Western cultures, as John Sizula says in this particular book, Communion and Otherness, has been framed along individual orientation more than a communal one. John Sizula says, it is not true that by definition the other is my enemy and my original sin, to recall the words of French philosopher J.P. Sartre. Western culture seems to subscribe to this view in many ways. Individualism is present in the very foundation of this culture. Ever since Boethius in the 5th century identifies the person with the individual, and St. Augustine at about the same time emphasized the importance of self-consciousness in the understanding of personhood, Western thought has never ceased to build itself and its culture on this basis. So, as much as we are saying Ubuntu, the spirit of charity, the spirit of family, the spirit of togetherness, the spirit of hospitality, the spirit of being with others is an anthropological reality. Because of the influence, social conditioning, because of how society has framed itself in the Western world, individual identity has taken preeminence, has been considered more than a communal identity. Say that now it is so critical for people to identify themselves within the context of an individual.